let's call, it's 11:50. We're going to call the city council meeting portion of our city council and planning commission special joint meeting. The city council has a quorum, so we will call the city council to order.
And also for the joint meeting with the city council, the planning commission will call their meeting to order, and we do have a quorum present as well.
Perfect. Ben, before we start, I got just a few things that, how the genesis of this meeting getting together. Over the years, council members, we all, and I'm sure planning commission members as well, we all get feedback on not just development overall in the city, but overall development downtown. And Bill and I, we were at Main Street last week, and the downtown proper area has become one of the most vibrant and sought after areas in the city. With that, there's been some challenges because when auctions take place, the people who are wanting to improve the area, they're competing with people who are wanting to keep rental property and really not improve the area. So we've had sort of this back and forth. And then also, Kathy was on planning commission at the time. Kurt, we had the North Highland study. I don't think the council ever adopted the North Highland study. And I was talking to Sam about this. I don't think we ever did that. And, from our planning staff too, it makes it really tough on the planning staff to not have defined direction. As someone who works in the development industry, there is nothing worse than planning staff using a document that's not been approved by the governmental bodies as a guiding directive. So I think that's one of the things the council needs to talk about that really, we've gotten questions on front entry garages and all these things. So when I met with Sam and Craig and Greg, it seemed like that it's so hard for the council and the planning commission to go through a 150-page planning document that is so detailed that we're not engineers, we're not planners, and a lot of that just doesn't make sense to us. So in my small brain, it was like, well, hey, take pictures of all the projects, or not all of them, but representative projects that have occurred over the last 6 or 7 years, and then let the council and the planning commission look at those and say, hey, this is what we're good with, this is what we're not good with. Also, I thought it was important that, for the planning commission, you have 2 council members on there, but really to hear from the overall council on this is the vision that we see and that we would like to really have that direction. So it gives you feedback. The worst thing that can happen is for the planning commission to approve a project that the council has no chance of passing when it comes to council. And I'll say to the planning commission, I've been on both sides. I sat on the planning commission for 5 or 6 years and remember when Mayor Bragg would come and talk to me and say, why did y'all send this here? You knew this wasn't going to pass. And so it's a balancing act to give guidance on where that is. The other part too, there's always going to be some type of subjectivity in planning, but I don't want anyone to get their feelings hurt. But the last thing that I think, and I've heard from most all the council members, we don't want the planning commission or the city council to turn into a glorified architectural review committee. And, I think it's not for us to say, hey, I don't like modern houses. It's not for us to say, I want railings on the front porch of these housings, or I don't like a roof line. I mean, there's some blending of that in there, but, there needs to be the subjectivity from the planning standpoint to where we have that as an overall vision of where we are. So I think exactly what y'all have put together is the perfect direction for us to go. I would ask the council, there's a couple of people who are here that have extensively developed downtown and built downtown projects, and so at some point when we get to a good break, would like to suspend the rules to let a couple of those individuals speak and maybe give us some perspective from the outside that we don't necessarily see. So, Ben, with that, I thank everybody for being here. That's sort of the goal of what we can not only give the commission, but that we can give our planning team and our building and codes team sort of an idea of where we are. Welcome to the city of Murfreesboro, Ben. We're glad you're here.
Thank you, Mayor McFarland. Thank you, City Council, for having us here today. And welcome, Planning Commission. We appreciate your attendance here today as well. Couldn't said it better myself. How you described it, that's exactly how I understood it as well. So, Ben Newman, Director of Planning, AKA staff, in case anyone didn't know. So, Mayor McFarland said we're here to discuss opportunities for design standards in the CCO, City Core Overlay, and the downtown area. So, today's agenda, we'll look at what our purpose is. Why are we here? I think we know what that is. Ms. Smith, Holly Smith, Principal Planner, will come up and describe the overlay for you and the Highlands area. She'll go through some projects. Now, we visited 11, but what we did, we got out at 3, and these were ones that we thought had the biggest opportunity for us to look at and see with the Planning Commission. So we're going to present those 3 in more detail, and we're adding in a 4th one that we didn't get out, but it's also pretty important for you to take a look at. Then we'll go through with Joel Aguilera. He's another planner of ours, bright guy, and he's going to have that dialogue with you so that we can get that feedback. I'll go over some other opportunities, maybe talk about some areas that we're not specifically looking at today on these slides, just things that are on your mind. And then we'll talk about some next steps. So why are we here? I think the mayor did an excellent job. You know, we're here to determine if the policy and the direction of development is in need of modification. Today, we're purposely and specifically looking at density, setbacks, building height, parking, site layout, lot coverage, buffers, amenities. And a lot of these are intertwined. So I know when Joel talks a little bit more about getting that feedback, he'll talk about how those are really intertwined. So we identified these based on, like the mayor said, feedback that we get from council, feedback that we're hearing from developers, and those areas that we're bumping up against. And so we really need your feedback so that we can align council and the Planning Commission, make sure we're on the same page. So I like to think of our zoning code as a living, breathing document. And it has changed over the last 3 years specifically. We've made some amendments to it. So think about it that way with me, if you would, that it is a living, breathing document as as council's vision changes, as developers change, as infill changes, and what we want to see, the appetite that our residents have here, we need to be able to make sure that we can change that as well. So if you'll look on your desk, you have a few documents there. This one is the bus tour packet, and this is really just for your information so that you have that. This is what Planning Commission looked at, and these were the ones that we visited. There's another one that you have, and this one has a few of the slides with the developments, and it has an area for notes. If you feel like it, take some notes so that when Joel comes up here, make sure to give some great feedback to him, and that's just for your reference as well. So we'll go ahead and get started, and Ms. Smith, come on up.
Thank you, Ben. Good afternoon, everyone. So glad to see all of you. I am Holly Smith. I am also AKA staff in the planning department and work predominantly in our City Core Overlay district. So for those of you who may not be familiar with our CCO, it has been expanded in size a couple years back, and it basically includes those areas that are bounded by the railroad tracks, Memorial, Clark, misses a little sections and jumps over to Middle Tennessee, back over to Martin Luther King, and back up by our Discovery Center. So this shows that particular area. The 4 projects, as Ben mentioned, are really just those projects that we thought would be of best discussion purposes, and they are in 4 different sections of town. So as you can see from the outside edges of the CCO, the Maple Keys townhomes and Rowan Bilbro are kind of the furthest away from our downtown. East Vine Villas, which is a little bit closer towards our downtown, and then Manny Station is the closest within 2 blocks of that downtown future footprint. We did not want to go over the other 7 projects, and those predominantly because they're single-family, duplex, some townhomes, and other mixed use. But these ones are really the ones that they went out in the field, took a look at, and actually had comments about. As I mentioned, the North Highlands study is actually only within a portion of the CCO. Really of most focus is this downtown footprint on this side of Broad Street, and then really a portion on the south side up to the railroad tracks with the Historic Bottoms program. Those are the two areas that those guidance documents talk about your future downtown and its footprint. With that, going into the project overview of the specific projects, we're really going to touch high level on some of those development standards as well as what we heard during the bus tour in those places. So the first one is Maple Key Townhome. That's the one that's in really the furthest northwesterly section of town. As I go through it, you might notice this ticker tape that provides the general stats, but I'll focus on the actual pictures so you have the visual of what some of these numbers mean. So when you look at it, and we look at it in the field, this is what was approved, and the format for all four projects will be what is approved is on the left side. What's in the field is here on the right side. And really starting with this particular one is that the Maple Key Townhomes is really two duplex type units side by side that have a 8-foot setback along North Maple, and then along Loki Street have a 15-foot setback that were part of the exceptions. Additionally, it's a 38-foot tall building when you get to the tallest point, and it is 3 stories. This particular one, looking at the layout in the field, folks did like the amount of parking, and it all surface parked with 18 spaces, of which 5 are considered surplus. So all of our parking standards are based on a 1 per bedroom. So when you look at those standards, and in the past, I think 1.1, but those are basically what the basis of those, but all surface parked, so they share that parking. And then as you see here in the bottom right-hand corner, they seem to be fine with setbacks and parking being good for this particular project. Height was okay based on the setbacks that they have on this particular one. Amenities, which you can see down here, which were located at the back of the site, they thought were a little bit lacking. They were not permanent, they were not all in place. And then also the exposed HVAC units utilize this formal open space between the actual units. So that's, again, probably the least dense project. That's at 9.76 units to the acre. It's 4 units, 2 dwellings. Going a little bit further inward, we're looking at the East Vine Villas project. This particular project is about 0.71 acres. That last one was a little bit bigger site. 8.46 is the density. Location-wise, here's Vine Street, south side of Vine. We have University, Highland Avenue for context, where it's at. And here you can see the aerial of it's a 3-plex building in the front with all their garages in the rear, and a 3-plex building in the back with those garages facing the interior to the site. In that particular area, when we're looking at what was approved versus what was in the field, it looks very similar. We got what we thought we were approving. Here's the portion that you actually would see on that building interior courtyard area that faces one another. This particular one, all of the parking is provided in 2-car garages with 2 surface spaces for every unit. So every unit has 4 parking spaces right next to their unit, even though they're only 3-bedroom properties. Then you have an additional couple of spaces for guest parking that is available. So again, here, 6 surplus stalls. That's mostly because there's 4 per and this had 26. What we did here out there was that it was a nice project. The amenities that you saw in that back section here included a dog park, a small pergola that were permanent structures. Folks seemed to like that. And as far as setbacks are concerned, this back section here actually had a 35-foot rear yard setback. Normally, you would have only seen 20 feet, so those back units actually have a very large backyard because of the depth of this lot being so large. The highest point on this particular building project is 30 feet. There was one or two comments that it might have been too dense. We might have not needed enough parking, and those were the comments that we heard on this particular project. The next one is a more dense, intense project. So we looked at a duplex product, a condo product, and here is really more a higher intensity. It has 18 units, and it was one of our newest redevelopment projects at that time. You might recall it was 5 lots, houses were in disrepair that were ready to be scraped and replaced. So this planned development project is on 1.28 acres. The frontage along here, Bilbro Street, is at 8 feet, and the setback on State Street is also at 8 feet. So when you look at it from the frontage, what's actually built in the field, that's the frontage along Bilbro, and here's the frontage along State Street and the corner of the lot. What we did see on this particular one, it does have 2 access points, one from each street that translates through the site. All of the units up in the front or facing the streets were larger units with 3 bedrooms and 4 parking stalls each. The interior ones, the 7 ones, were all 2 bedrooms with all surface 2 car spaces. So here in total, they had 13 surplus parking stalls for those 18 units. So there's 60, but 47 would have only been required here. For exceptions, they did look at some exceptions to not have our normal buffer landscaping between it and the adjacent single-family residential. And from a height standpoint, what we did here, height felt a little misleading because it's actually 26 feet from the base of the building, but when you add that 5 to 6 feet base, that does bring it to 31 feet in height, but it is only a 2-story product. So again, we're getting a little bit more intense. And as far as amenities and formal open space, the units here in the front all have their own rooftop open space, but that was not allowed to be counted towards their overall formal open space. But this section here in the center that you see has a pergola, fire feature, and some benches was counted for the formal open space for the overall project. And then lastly, they asked for an exception to not have a trash dumpster located within this site, but they did leave a pad space available, so that should that be needed. And then the last project is really going the furthest and closest into the CCO, which if you see this red section, that's where your North Highlands plan talks about the end of your downtown being. This one is basically on South Manny Street between State and Castle Street. You may recall this building across the street has been under construction for a while, but is now doing tenant build-outs. Yesterday night, they were putting the brick on the Manny Station building, which is a 3-story product with commercial on the ground floor. 13 units of residential 1-bedroom units for it. And when you look at the actual exceptions, they are looking at the setback line is at 0 here along the front. And then they also looked at an exception to the height limit of 42 feet to go up to 45 feet. And that's based on what was in place in the zoning at the time. Some were okay with the height, considering this property adjacent to it is directly on the opposite side of the street. They were, of course, very happy about the commercial being on the bottom, but some were uncomfortable about the 0-foot setback on the front, 45 in the back. And lastly, all of the parking on this one, it is 1 access point, and they're looking at 27 stalls in the back being provided. That's 2 more than what our standards require. And here, you would have normally seen about a 20-foot front yard setback if it was the highway commercial zone district asking for that 0. So I'm going to talk about just one of the development standards before I turn it over to Joel, who will go more specifically into hearing from you on what do you think about these particular standards in these various locations. But there's something that we call a build-to line when it comes to front setbacks. Our CCO is the only portion of our town that has this provision. Most places you have a minimum setback, but you don't have a build-to line, which means this is where the building needs to be. So this just shows in a visual perspective, Robert Street, Lee Street, and Manny as an example of how that would work. So if you only see one house coming down Robert Street, that existing setback is based on the building face. Porches are usually allowed to encroach 5 feet. And that becomes the build-to line. So this is at 16 feet away from the right-of-way, so that becomes the build-to line along that whole street. And last year, you made some provisions to have a plus-minus 2 feet to have a little bit more leeway, but I think 5 feet was actually asked by the development community, but that's where it landed. And then the 25-foot build-to line is a maximum. So anywhere in the CCO, you cannot put your buildings back further than 25 feet. Again, it was mostly because the neighborhood wanted to see, we didn't want to see 60, 80 feet and all concrete in the front yard. And then we said, and no closer than 10 feet for any structures so that we could allow for utilities. So I'm going to turn that over to Joel, who will go through all of those really 8 development standards that Ben had mentioned at the beginning of the provision. And we look forward to your input. Take those notes. And Mr. Aguilera.
Thank you, Ms. Smith. So, as Holly said, for those who don't know me, my name is Joel Aguilera, proud card-carrying member of the shadowy group known as staff that you all hear about today. I'm really happy to be here because this is a very exciting project. Ben outlined the priorities. Ben outlined our purpose for today's presentation. Holly talked about the projects. Holly talked about the elements, density, site layout, everything that is important for us to get your vision on. But now we're going to open up the floor to conversation. We really want to talk about vision today because it's important that we're understanding your vision for these development standards so we can communicate this correctly, consistently to developers. We're supporting the policies that support your vision for these developments. And again, we're getting the appropriate development types within these areas. And so that's what we really want to talk about today with this vision, with these vision statements for these development standards. So Holly covered setbacks. We looked at, we're going to be talking about this in this kind of context in these areas relating to the projects, again, going back to this map. But the first one and the second standard that is arguably most important, density. The reason why we want to talk about density and highlight density, and it's really important to cover, is its impact on other elements. If you have higher density, it's going to impact parking. It's going to impact amenities. It's going to impact coverage and building height. We really want to talk about that and get that direction from you because with density, it may mean lesser parking, it may mean lesser vegetation, but in the areas where it's supported, where it's important, we get that pedestrian connectivity. We get that vibrancy that we want in the downtown in those areas where we want that commercial activity. We get that area, that pedestrian traffic so they can enjoy the Italian combo at Domenico's made by the mastermind Jeff Murphy himself. So that's what we want. We want to be able to encourage that. But again, that's why we want to have this conversation on density because it's critical. It's critical to look at these projects and understand that density is important, and it can't be looked at in a numerical sense. We can't look at it as one specific number. We can't say E equals MC squared, and that gives me 27 units. You have to look at it in its context, and that's why Holly presented the context of those areas, those projects, because we need to understand from you all, and I'm going to start it off now with the question, where do you want to see that density? Do you want projects like Manny Station in the areas of South Manny Avenue closer to the core of the downtown where, again, it supports that pedestrian connectivity. It encourages that vibrancy you want to see in the downtown. Where do you want that density? Do you want it protected in the areas where there's single-family neighborhoods? That's what we want to ask today for this development standard for density. Where do you want to see that density at in the downtown area?
Do you know offhand what the density at Oakland's, the new Oakland's project is?
Don't,
Okay.
but we can find out.
We can find out for them.
I mean, I would imagine that density is probably 20 plus per acre at least.
Might not be that high.
Okay.
Some of the projects that we had with some of these densities, it was really interesting to see. When we went through the bus tour, East Vineville has had, as Ms. Holly covered, it had a significant density per acre. But when you look at its context, it didn't seem like a lot. However, on a project like East Vine, the Nook on Vine, for it just being 2 single-family detached homes, it had a density per acre of 13.3%, I believe. And so we can't really look at it in that sense. We really need to think about the context of it. So looking at this map again, where do you all want to see that? Do you want to see that concentrated in the core? Where do you all really want to see this at? Where do we want to see it protected?
I'll just say real quick, is there any area downtown that we wouldn't want to see density? I mean, it all is, like, if you go the 4 projects you've had and where you've got the CCO, I mean, that all is pretty much the same density as it is right now. Now, there's not, I mean, Main Street would probably be one that you wouldn't want to see. I don't know if you could really go through and say Lytle Street's different than Olive Street, or Olive Street's different than North Maple, or North Maple's different than Church. They all are very similar.
You're right, Mayor. And the one thing that we definitely want to get direction from you on, and why we're asking this question, is because we want to see redevelopment in these areas, I think, throughout the CCO. There's streets that Planning Commission has seen, that we have seen as a community, where we want to see reinvestment. But what type of residential product do we want to see encouraged there? On First Avenue, are we comfortable with something that's going to be a higher density, or do we want to ensure that those single-family neighborhoods are protected? It's great. We want to see maybe a new single-family home constructed there. Maybe we want to see that area revitalized, but that's why we're starting this question of where do we want it? Where do we want that higher concentration? Because if we have that higher concentration, again, it's going to impact those other elements. And so that's why we're trying to get direction right now. So when we communicate to developers, we can communicate correctly. This is the area where we really want you to develop your mixed-use commercial and residential development here.
Comments?
Yeah, I mean, are we only taking comments from the council, or is this anybody in the room?
Let us get through this real quick, and then we'll open up. And I mean, Joel, this is what I would say, and I don't want to dominate this, but so on First Avenue, for example, I lived on First Avenue. But the average house on First Avenue right now, I would say, is low 200s. That's 250. That is, if you were going to tear it down. So if you don't allow density, no one can build a single-family home back there on a $250,000 lot. And I think that's the problem that we're seeing. We say that as a council, we can't look at economics. But at the same time, if we don't look at what things are selling for downtown, they're not going to improve, because you can't make the numbers work to improve anything. No one's going to be able to build a 2,000 square foot house on a $250,000 lot and ever get financing for that lot, or ever get it to appraise. Even if you're buying it personally, say you spend $750,000 on a 2,000 square foot house, you're $400 a square foot. That doesn't work. So I think the density is, you said, like what you were just saying, that it's really in the context. The context is it a good project in the overall area? So I think it's going to be impossible to go through and pick street by street and say we don't want to see density on overall areas, because they're all very similar.
I agree. I think when Joseph Baylock came up with this idea, his whole intent was to change how our downtown looked. And he said we have to give the developers a little leeway. or they're not going to invest in downtown. I think now what we need to look at is, just like you said, is it a good project for that area? If not, who's going to invest if they're not going to make any money? It's not our job to make sure that the developer makes money, but it also is our job to make sure that we're reinvesting in downtown.
Yeah, and on the density, there's a lot of good place for density up here, but some of the projects are dense just to be dense. It's like we're slamming an extra unit in just to slam an extra unit in. We need to, like Kurt said, we need to make sure they're good projects and they're not just cramming density in just to be dense.
Like 4 in the back, 3 in the front.
Yeah.
So much of what these developments are going to be, Joel, is C projects that generate something else in that neighborhood, and so I think if in general terms, very broad general terms, I'd say closer to the core, the downtown area, density might be tolerated a little bit better as you move to our square, basically. But when you move back into these residential areas, there might be other considerations, the quality and some of the amenities that are provided within that development. You might be able to yin a little yang more density if the project creates not just the same kind of density that we have in our core. It's almost common sense to some degree. When you get more commercial, then you can accept a little bit more density in a project that's presented. And I think those issues are going to be a little bit closer to our downtown, to our square. But all of these projects have created that energy in that area. And you can't say, it's really hard to say one side. I know you want direction, and it's good that you do. I guess maybe the conversation's as much as if we put a number by it. The conversation that we're concerned about quality of development in our downtown, and not just that you make $1. But I think that is as big a conversation as a point that we could make to the development community as it is, that we're opening this, that we're going to give them a number. Because it's going to be really hard, I think, to establish a number, like you say, that basically gives a huge direction to this. But the common sense would tell you that as you move more into existing residential areas, the density doesn't need to be quite as much because the impact on that particular neighborhood is not. But if it's a great development and it's got all kinds of other things to consider, you might use it as a C project or something to consider that area is rented and it needs it. I mean, I was raised in this area too. There's areas that need some attention where the existing properties are deteriorating. Well, one of these projects is right across the street from where I was raised, and I remember when those existing buildings started to get dilapidated, people didn't want to put the money into them, but somebody put a significant investment in there, and I think it's transforming that whole neighborhood. So I know I appreciate the process and what we're doing, but I hope the issue is more the broader sense, what we're communicating, that we're concerned, and we want to see people commit to that concern as opposed to specific numbers.
You all have brought up some pretty good points, and I think I saw some, Ms. Jones, I think you wanted to bring up something.
Yes, just if I can make a
Sure.
comment. Just to go back to where we're talking about, we don't want 4 units on the back or 3 units on the front in certain circumstances. But I think to Bill's point, it is very specific to each project. 4 units on the back and 3 in the front might be perfect on a certain property out there because it was larger to begin with. I think it's almost like every project is its own, we have to make the decision based on the size of the property, the layout of the property, do we have more frontage and a shallower lot versus the deep, long, skinny lots, So I think we have to pay attention to what do we want to make sure we see in the the open space and amenity type things. I think the Maple Key Townhomes was like one of those eye-opener things that you don't know it when you're looking at it on paper, but what looked like it was going to be a nice amenity area between the buildings turned out to be nothing more than 4, of the heat and air HVAC units stacked up in there. So do we make sure that we always see those? When you're bringing us a plan, you have to show us where the HVAC units are going to be. We need to know how much space they're taking up, where they are, where's the trash receptacles going to be, is there room for those in the garage, or is the garage small enough? Can we park a car in the garage? Do we have certain size limits on the garages, as opposed to just a straight density? Because I think the lot itself will determine a lot of, if they can get the amenities in, if they can fit the garages in, then that means they can get X number of units in there. And that unit might be a 4-bedroom, 3-bedroom, whatever, depends on the size of the bedrooms they put in there. It's almost like every single project is its own for us to review. But I think the biggest thing for us as Planning Commission is, there's no sense in us going down a path of, yes, this seems to meet everything we want, if really the council doesn't want 4 on the back and 3 in the front. We just don't want to go there. We'd rather see it like this, or we'd rather see it like that. We really need to understand if there's certain, guidelines you have for us, where we're used to looking at projects and we decide if we think, okay, it fits everything that is in all the guidelines, in all the ordinances, but then it really wasn't your vision. So I think that's where we're missing the point, is not being able to always know why we missed that one. What was it you didn't like about a project that we sent? How did it get here?
So I've got just maybe a stupid question. What is the purpose of formal open space?
The purpose for formal open space is to provide a green, natural area that has some type of amenity for the residents, whether it be a grill area, a dog park, anything. It's a contained space that's meant to be some kind of form of recreation for that type of development. And we have various different sizes, and Ms. Smith can elaborate a little further on it. There's certain types of requirements in the CCO, but essentially that's what it is. It's your formal open space for your gatherings, for any kind of recreation.
So why wouldn't we allow, if a developer builds a 3 stories and has a 700 square foot open space where you've got a fireplace and a grill and a TV, why would we not include that as open space? Formal, because for me, maybe I'm older, but I would rather go up on my 3rd patio and not see anyone as to go to a formal open space. Because here's where I'm going with this. It's like an attorney asking the questions, you already know the answer. I think one of the I'm not going to be that blunt. One of the things I think we've missed the mark is we require formal open space, not only downtown, but we're approving storage facilities that we're requiring formal open space on storage facilities. And who the heck is going to goes to a storage facility to say, you know what, I know I'm going to be putting things in my storage facility, but man, those benches over there look really nice. I'm going to go hang out there. And then you're sitting with your wife and say, the U-Haul facility has got a great picnic area. Let's go to the U-Haul facility for formal space. No one does that. And every time I go to Bonefish, because when Whole Rod Development developed the Bonefish, we have this formal open space in between the 2 buildings that no one even knows it's back there, but that was our requirement. We required formal open space, so they said, no problem, we'll stick it back behind the Chop House and the Bonefish, and no one even knows it's back there. So I think those are the things where, in my opinion, just putting formal open space to hit a check mark that no one's ever going to use just doesn't make sense. If it's an 85 townhome unit development and you need to have a dog park or a walking trail around, that makes sense. But on 4 or 5 units, to put a 15 by 20 piece of grass to think that people are going to go out there and hang out, That's just in real life, it's not going to happen. I would rather someone go walk down Manny Avenue and go, I mean, we've got a big backyard, but this morning we walked all over Siegel Elementary and Siegel Park because that was our formal open space. We wanted to go, that's what we do. So those are the things I just think.
And that's some good comments on there, and I'm glad you're touching on that, because I want to save that energy. We do have something related to amenities.
Yeah.
And
Maybe-
so that is a really good topic.
Corporate motivational speaker today, Joel. You're like,
Those are some really good comments. Those are some really good comments. We want to have that. Those are very good comments to be addressing amenities in the downtown, because these are kind of the conflicts that we've come into.
Yeah.
And that is why we put as one of our lists as amenities, because
Where Kathy was going, trying to spur this along, is, major on the major and minor on the minor. So what are our major things that we want to see? And maybe formal open space, if it's big enough, that's a minor. That's a dog park, sure, but, a gazebo, I mean, people just don't go hang out at gazebos with a grilling station anymore. And we require people to put those in, but they just never get used. I mean, like in real planning world, it may look nice, but, people are not anymore going and saying, I'm going to take my steak, I'm going to walk 100 yards, and I'm going to grill out at a community barbecue area and bring my folding chair. They just don't do that. So, hey, I think this will be a good time.
I usually go to the U-Haul place or to grill my steak.
Those are things, we've had those discussions for years, that we require formal open space, but we're requiring stuff that looks nice but never gets used.
But
We
we need
required
to-
that on Gresham Park, I think, that formal open space.
We do need to figure out some way, though, to have some type of green space. If maybe it's a certain amount of landscaping, even if it's per unit, maybe it's not to be used by everybody, but we don't want just the concrete and the bricks. We need to soften it up with the landscaping some way or another.
I
If it's
agree.
not for the whole
Sure.
development to use, we just got to figure out how we want to see that in there.
I agree, Kathy, and I think, Mayor, I think the market should dictate what amenities are provided, if any, but I think that having some sort of usable, I think that's the key word, right? Like, we can have open space, like we saw at that Maple Key project, but it wasn't usable because the HVAC units were intruding. So I wouldn't have minded if absolutely nothing was there. No gazebo, no grill, nothing but grass and some trees, right? Because we don't want to walk downtown where the setbacks are this big on the front and the side, and the building is corner to corner. Corner setback with no grass, no nothing. I just don't think, we're not New York City. So, even New York City has some grass.
We just need to make sure that open space is not wasted space.
Right.
Yeah.
Because I think that's what we're seeing, a lot of wasted space.
Like
What do you mean by wasted, Madeline? Like putting
Like-
HVAC units in it or
Well,
something?
just like Shane was saying, gazebos. When's the last time somebody has set out and then, hey, let's go under the gazebo? It's just wasted space. And I was going to make some of the same comments you made, Kathy, from the council side, giving you more directives on what we are looking for. Yeah, so it really helped.
Hey, Joel, this may be a good time to we've got two people here that have done extensive work downtown. Where do you see that we could have them come in and speak?
We should really cover these first.
Okay.
Because I really want to tap into that amenities discussion. That's something that staff and clearly everybody has gotten a lot of feedback on. So but after we've covered all this,
Okay.
because there may be another one here where we're going to be talking again pretty in depth. So let's cover all this, and then we can probably circle back.
Real quick, I agree with the mayor. Like, most people don't go to a gazebo just to say, hey, let's hang out and drink beer, at a gazebo. Maybe Brian Burns does, but I don't. That was for you, Brian, okay? I got it. Okay. But I do think you need the green space. If you've got a dog to go walk, or you just want to go out there and take a chair, whether it's landscaping or what have you. I'm okay with whatever the number is that makes sense based upon the lot. I don't think we can give you a number. I'm like Bill. I don't think we can say, here's the number. I think it depends upon the lot and what architecturally they're trying to do and what makes sense. My one thing would be on the building height. You know, I wouldn't want to be cramming something that's 3 stories in that's now you've got this landmark in the center of town that's 3 stories, and you've got just a bunch of 1-story, you know, single-family homes around. I think the one on Maney, that blended in because you had that other one right across the street. So that's my 2 cents worth.
Yeah, to your point on the bus tour, there were a couple of them that Darian and I were talking about, like creating just an imaginary triangle of the setback off the street and the height of the property, that some of them are a lot better proportionally set back than others, and others were like, you were doing this.
Yeah.
So.
Well, but then what I brought up after you guys said that was, if Mr. Burns brings a project in front of us and it's the first one on that street to be developed, it's of course going to be significantly taller than the other older established homes. So we don't want to say we're cutting our leg off by saying we have to limit the density here just because the older houses are smaller, knowing that in 3, 5, 6 years, someone's going to come along and build something else there too. So we don't want to sell ourselves short and actually prohibit density at the same time.
And I think you also have to, like, if you put the shoe on the other foot, and so we're looking from an elected official standpoint and a planning commission standpoint. Clearly, I built the project on the corner of Olive and Church Street. You know, and at the time, the planning staff was like, hey, we want to see something more dense and taller there. Because next door is someone that we tried to buy the property that would not sell the property, and it's in disrepair. Behind that piece of property is a trailer that you can't see. Literally, there's a trailer with an electric meter on it. So to your point, how do you go through and say, okay, yeah, that's a 3-story project that's now selling for $600,000 a unit, but we're not going to allow someone to have height because there's a slumlord next door that won't sell their house and there's a trailer in the back. So I don't know you can really put dictate to say, okay, look, we're not going to allow this project to go to 30 feet or 35 feet.
And Jamie brings up a good point, because I just said to Bill, I said, there's houses downtown that are 3-story. So for me to say that, I retract it. I think it has to be what makes sense.
Darren and I's conversation wasn't restricting the height. It was, if it was going to be so high, push it off the street a little bit better. That way it flows better in with the rest of the neighborhood. Let them have the height.
Yeah.
But instead of putting it tall and right on the street, make it tall and back it up a little bit.
Well, but then I make the same argument. Then when the house next door develops, it's got to be pushed way back off the street too. You could still lose density.
And the thing I think we need to look at, we need to look more out into the future. What we need to look at, because a lot of these neighborhoods, like we were talking about, for instance, First Avenue, older homes, people on that home and on that street, I know 2 have passed. So we have to look out into the future. It won't always be that, because if someone sells it, they may want to come up with the 3 stories. You know, so just kind of, if we consider the future too of an area, because as these houses get older and they are not kept up, they're coming down anyway.
And
Joel, that's the thing. I think the elephant in the room is the likelihood of there being another development like Oakland's downtown is not going to happen, because there's not the available land. And the likelihood of somebody being able to go in and buy an entire city block or buying 10 acres, that's not going to happen. So here's the elephant in the room is, are we okay with a hodgepodge of things downtown? And I don't know that you can't get away from having a hodgepodge of development downtown, because every lot is not uniform. And it's already a hodgepodge when you go look at what's there right now. You go to 4th Avenue, you go to First Avenue. First Avenue has 25 to 30 foot setbacks, and you've got 100-foot backyards. But there's really not an opportunity that you could go build a townhome complex on a 40-foot wide lot with a 100-foot backyard. it's going to have to be single-family that goes back there. So, anyway.
But I appreciate Councilwoman Harris's comment. You know, we are really trying to think about the future with this. And you're right, Mayor, some of this is in hodgepodge. But that's why we've done this meeting today, is because right now, the plans that we have set in place, I don't want to go too far back to the density, but you are talking about it being project by project. Right now, the plans that are in place currently make it almost too difficult to understand what even is that vision. We have overlay after overlay on top with these sub-area studies like North Highland. And when we're trying to communicate to developers, this property is in the neighborhood compatibility overlay. It's also in the mixed residential corridor. So you can only do, we're trying to get from you guys to understand really if these areas, are we okay of doing this? Because I know you all are talking about project by project, and you're absolutely right. Every project's going to be unique, but what we're trying to do is understand your direction of the context of these areas to see this is where we want to have this project here. I know you want to put 15 units right here. It's not necessarily going to work, but we want it to be in this area. Our city council has identified this area around North Church Street or anything where we want to see taller buildings. And so that's why we're trying to think of this in the context of an area, so we can really define that area, so we can encourage those things when you're talking about it. Because in this next topic here, as we're talking about density with different products, building height was the next biggest thing. Building height in these products, when we were going around with Planning Commission, there were buildings that were taller than others. Some of them that mimicked the style, the height of the existing neighborhood, and some of them that were, again, exceptionally taller than the rest of the neighborhood. But again, the current zoning or the area that it was in the North Highland maybe encouraged that, even though it didn't really necessarily state that with other areas in the mixed form housing and the general plan and all these other documents, maybe encourage that. But that's why we're, again, wanting to have this open dialogue with you all on building height, because we want to understand, having reviewed these areas, these projects that have come in, again, talking about building height, where would we be okay with taller buildings, and how would you want to see that? Would you guys want to see a taller building, knowing in the future we want the downtown to expand, we want the core to expand? Are we okay with higher residential, the flats at Olive? You know, Mayor, you're right, the history of that, it's right across the street in the North Highland study, it's right across the street from the downtown central core area that's envisioned to be expanded. And so right now it may look a little bit out of place, but as Councilwoman Harris stated, we got to think about the future, and that's where we would want maybe a taller building. But that vision right now has to be established, because if you want there to be taller buildings like the flats at Olive, like maybe the Row and Bilbro, we can implement that policy. But that's why we want to open up that dialogue right now, because we really want to understand your vision for these areas. So again, starting off, and we've already kind of covered this a little bit anyways regarding height, but where would you guys be okay with taller buildings? Just a simple broad-based question, thinking about that. Not necessarily by project, but areas, where do you think it's appropriate at? And then again, if you all don't want it to be so specific, we can look at that 3 to 4 stories, whatever it may be. That's what our current documents say. But we really should start off with that question. Where were we okay with height?
I'm okay with it the closer they are to downtown, but I think in general, let's just say you're out there on the eastern side there around First Avenue, Second Avenue, I'm okay with it if it makes sense to what Jamie's point was earlier. And Sean, I think you said it too, if you go up but you push it back, that's okay.
Are we saying that it can be more than 3 stories ever, or are we maxing it at 3 stories?
I think we've hit all these pretty good. I mean, I would say like max 3 stories everywhere, but there's not, the flats at Olives, for example, you look out on your front porch at a 7-story building. You know, you got the judicial building across the street. So
Commercial versus residential, right? Do we let that come into play or not?
I mean,
I don't
mean,
know.
across the
I think-
street, yeah, I'm saying, it's a good point. I mean, across the street, there's residential across from the judicial building now. The property's been for sale. The guy's marketing, so I don't know. I mean, to me, height, you can't have green space without having height. So you're either going to have to be okay with it. I mean, like, I wouldn't want to build a 7-story building, because if you build a 7-story building, you're going to have to put an elevator in. I mean, and you're really an apartment. So, I mean, 3 seems like a valid height restriction.
Yeah.
But that would be my question. What would be the negative if somebody wanted to build a 3-story building on Clark? I mean, is that better than what's there? So that would be, why would we want to define you can only do a 3-story building in these areas? I mean, if it's a good project and it's 3 stories, then I would be.
So that's going back to our project by project still. We're looking at it for the exact area and deciding what might work for that area. Okay. Good with that.
Just want to say, Ms. Smith brought up a pretty good point. 3 stories right now is allowed everywhere right now in the CCO. They can go up to that. I think the conversation is, can we go higher? Is that your direction? Can we go higher? Especially in the downtown area where the Keystone on Broad was 5 or 6 stories, I believe. Where we want that. We want that healthy downtown natural look. But in the remaining areas of this, are we okay with higher? That's what we want to understand from you all.
I think if you said 3 is reasonable, but if you came to me and they said, hey, this is 6 stories, 7 stories, I would say no. I think it's going to depend upon the project. If you came to me and it was 4 stories and it's 1 street over from the downtown, I'm probably going to be, okay, yeah, that makes sense. But if you're saying, okay, we're going to go put something on 1st or 2nd Avenue that's 5 or 6 stories, I don't know if that makes sense.
But the likelihood of that happening is minuscule. Because, I mean, you can do a 3-story with an open space and not get into structural engineering and having it to be concrete or have it to be steel. You don't have to worry about sprinkling on 3 stories. So, I mean, there are all these things that once you start getting into that height, that everything changes.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, if somebody came across in the judicial building and said, look, I want to build my personal house that's going to be a 7-story with 2 elevators, and then my thing would be, well, why wouldn't we want someone if they wanted to do that? I mean, the Lowry's house on the Lowry's house on East Main Street, it's 5 stories, I think, isn't it? 4?
I think we're wanting to allow some of the builders to maybe discuss that as well, if they have a chance to comment on anything like that.
Me too. I don't care. Sure.
Brian Burns with BA Homes. I had this big, long thing, but everything's been discussed, so I don't really have much to say now. I've done 67 houses to date in downtown area. So I feel like I have as good a sense of downtown as anybody. The things that we need to, in my opinion, we need to work on is the build 2 lines. I'm getting ready to, Robert Street was just brought up, I'm getting ready to build 2 houses right across the street from Oakland's Mansion. I don't need to be building $750,000 homes 10 and 12 foot off the street and having a 50-foot backyard. It's just not wise. That's not a good idea. The build 2 lines, in my opinion, need to be 15 or 20 feet. Because you really, when you're driving down the road, you don't tell the difference that much in them. But it's a big difference when you're living there. So the build 2 lines was one of my biggest things I've got. Front load garages, I get told Sometimes we can have front-load garages, sometimes we can't have front-load garages. This is my opinion on front-load garages. The two houses on Robert Street I'm going to build are front-load garages, but they're really nice, high-end homes. It's something you would see in Green Hills. It's that nice. When you got a 50-foot wide house, and if you're going to leave the setbacks on the sides 10, that means I can build a 24-foot wide house there on that lot. Because you got to have at least 12 to 15 foot on one side for a driveway. You got 10 foot on the other side for a setback. Then you go back to the back of your house and you've got a 25 to 30 foot turnaround so you can get into the backload garage. And there's no backyard. So I've tried to sell a family a home for $700,000 that has no backyard. Front load garages is what works. I think, tend to get a bad name on them because we're used to the old plain garage doors. You can make a front load garage look nice. You can go anywhere in Green Hills and see it, and it looks great. So that's one of my I won't say pet peeves. It's one of the things that we need to look at. The other thing I have an issue with is it was brought up here, is using, there's a lot of different opinions up here. Nobody's wrong on their opinions of what they like, if it's right or wrong. But we need to let the market and the builders dictate the colors, the designs, whether it's modern, whether it's craftsman, what it is. I'm not going to build something I think won't sell. And selling is 100% what guarantees if the market's right or wrong. I think we have gotten too much wanting to make it a HOA where we're telling you exactly how everything should look. It's got to the point on sometimes where I feel like I have to ask if I want Berber or plush carpet in the house, it seems like. I know I'm exaggerating, but let's let the market dictate a lot of this. I know we want design guidelines, we want quality built stuff, but I think we're pushing that to the point now where we're basically building the same stuff over and over because that's what everybody's comfortable with. And then the cost too. I've had 3 or 4 people from council ask me about my ideas of making things more affordable. We can't make things more affordable the way that it is. The only thing you guys can do to help is give us density. And the economics of it is that Mayor McFarland had talked about was you can't, without density, I can't put the units there. And I'm not cramming a unit in just to cram a unit in. I'm trying to, Billboro, that's the one, Roland Billboro, I did that. I bought 5 houses that was in Frank Fly's estates. These houses had more rats than they had nails in them. They were nasty. There was nothing there that the city would have been proud of. But these houses also, they were about to fall down. The only way I was able to buy those from the slumlords, though, because that's who I was online bidding against, was the slumlords who want to take them, put some gutters on them, paint them, and re-rent them. So you can't. For me to compete against that person, I have to give a premium for the price. When I give that premium, the only thing I can get out of it's density to make it work, or I can't buy the units. It's like Mr. Mayor said, you can't build a $400 foot house and sell. I have to have the density to make something that is affordable. And affordable nowadays is $400,000 to $500,000. That's really what's affordable now. So that's the few things I'd wrote down. I was going to say something about former open space, but I just assumed somebody would come kick me in the head if I brought that up. So since it's already been brought up, I'll mention it. Our former open space makes no sense. I'll be the first to say it. I also did East Fine Villas, and one of the things y'all had on there as a compliment was you liked the former open space. The funny thing is, the people who live over there come to me 2 weeks ago and want to know, hey, can we take this down? Nobody wants to set it in a gazebo anymore. And
what do they want instead, Brian? Just grass?
They want a place for their dog to pee. That's what they want.
Well, see, I think that goes to my point of I don't think we should dictate what goes there. Or would you be on board with that if we just said that it has to be?
Yes, I'm all about making stuff nice. I think I love the guidelines of keeping stuff nice. But
I have a question for you.
Okay.
Would you, and this is something I think as a council I would like to see, would you be more apt to give money into a parks fund so say that you're going to spend $25,000 on formal open space. I'm just throwing a number out there.
Okay.
As a developer, would it make more sense that formal open space should really be park property downtown? Wouldn't, as a developer, you give money into a fund that would allow the city to maybe go buy a vacant piece of property that we then could turn into formal open space that nothing went on, that you would have a park downtown?
I feel your estimate question that every other builder's going to hear my answer on and going to lynch me on it, but I'll go ahead and answer it. Yes, I would. But if the price is, if it's a reasonable price. But I mean,
And what I'm just saying is, like, as we see some of these properties come available, if we had the opportunity to put pocket parks in the downtown area that would allow to suffice some of that green space.
from the comments I've gotten from all the projects I've done is nobody could care about a gazebo. People do enjoy like games, like having a place to play cornhole, having spaces to bring their badminton set up, whatever. They enjoy stuff like that. They don't enjoy a gazebo. They don't enjoy grills. Everybody's got their own grill. Nobody's going to walk over here and grill a steak. And we do this stuff because it looks good on paper, and when the engineering firms in town get it all prettied up and colored, it just looks all nice and glamorous, and we think, wow, that's gorgeous. In real life, it just doesn't work. Otherwise, the homeowners wouldn't be asking me if I can tear down something I built 2 years ago. And you all were talking about where to put stuff. I think you have to look at every project individually, as Ms. Jones said. You can't say I guess you can do whatever you want, but I guess I don't know that I could say this is a great place to put 3 stories, this is a great place to put 2 stories. First Avenue and Second Avenue, Blake Smith done an incredible job rehabbing those old houses there. They look great. I don't think you'd want to put Bilbro right in the middle of it. But Bilbro's a different street. Lee Street's a different street. Some of these streets are so bad and so dangerous. You want those houses torn down. You want that stuff gone, in my opinion. And is the builder or the developer who's doing that project leaving it better than it's already there? I think that's what it comes down to. And hopefully you guys can help us on that a little bit.
David? Thanks, Brian.
Maybe at first.
Make his ego bigger.
Notice that, David, that we made the determination to go to TV next week, the next meeting, as opposed to this. I'm kidding.
So am I allowed to use this? Can I change this screen? Because I'm going to talk about one particular piece of property, and I'd love to pull it up on like Google Street View. Is that okay?
He knows how to use it better than we do.
I mean,
He's on staff.
computers, you know. All right. Airport. There's not like a password or something here. I don't know. Here. Nope. That's an odd place.
We just state your name for the record.
Oh, I'm gonna. Yeah. I got it all written out here.
Are you on that one?
That sure looks small on here. Anyway, let me find it. All right. If it sounds like I'm reading from this, it's because I am. I do not do public speaking, and I could probably talk for 10 hours about downtown Murfreesboro and all the various things related to that, and so I printed this out so that I could kind of stay on track. My name is David Criswell, for those of you who do not know me. I have been in Murfreesboro since 2003. The first house I ever bought was 1000 North Spring Street in November of 2003. I currently have about 65 units. What's that?
It's the house, that's the street I was raised on.
Monroe?
Monroe.
Which house? Yeah, I own that. No kidding.
David's the slumlord we were talking
I had absolutely. Well, let me show you what it looks like now, or have you driven past? Have you driven past it lately?
I haven't been over there. We were talking about it the other day, but yeah.
So that's what it looks like now. Me and a partner redid that about probably 7 or 8 years ago, and it was a total gut it to the studs rehab and everything. So, and I would say that this house that I'm going to show you, that I'm going to go back to in a minute, it's I have maybe 2 or 3 that look like that. Probably the bulk of them look like 304 where Mr. Shack, I promise, we did not set this up in advance. But you can see this house has been redone, new roof, new vinyl siding, it got gutted, new plumbing, new electric. I own this blue one right here across the street. What's that?
Ms. Lamb's house.
This one, the white one, it's been updated.
Emily's house.
Most of the houses on this street have been updated to this point, fortunately, but anyway, I have been, from this angle, the lot looks a little bit more adequate. But anyway, I've been here since 2003, so 20 years now. I currently have about 65 units, most of which are in the downtown area. I have spent literally millions of dollars, invested millions of dollars in downtown. I care about downtown. I want it to be better. And so everything that I'm saying today comes from that, okay? Sadly, there are a lot of houses in downtown Murfreesboro that are slums. They're functionally obsolete. They've outlived their lifespan. And the only way that those are ever going to go away is if you guys allow people to build where the numbers make sense. We've got to simplify the regulations and make it financially feasible for people to buy them, bulldoze them, and build newer and nicer homes. For example, I have a duplex on Monroe Street, which I did not know I was going to be able to pull up, but here we go. And just for reference, I'm trying not to brag, but I own this one, the tan one that's been completely remodeled, and this white one also, which is the one that I'm talking about. There is, according to Google Earth earlier and a measuring tool that I used, there's 65 feet between these two units. I had a meeting with one of the staff members last year. This white unit, it's in really bad shape. Frankly, it needs to be bulldozed. It's not so far gone that it's not habitable. I have a tenant in there. Long story, but I made a deal with a previous owner that I would never kick him out or raise his rent. So he's lived there since 1978. You probably know him. Do you know who I'm talking about, Howard?
No, I don't.
Okay, he's been there since 1978. Anyway.
He used to chase Bill out of his yard as a kid.
Probably.
So anyway, the only way that it really makes sense for me to bulldoze a structure that could be rehabbed would be if I can add some density. And so my request was, hey, there are 65 feet between this tan duplex and this white duplex. 65 feet is wider than a lot of lots in downtown, tons of lots in Murfreesboro, and there's plenty of room. You can see this giant area here. There's plenty of room for an additional unit. And if I could say, okay, I'm going to scrape what's here, start over, build 3 nice new units, boy, that's a no-brainer for me to bulldoze this white duplex. I was told that I could not do that. Which I frankly, I don't understand. Oh, I'm getting off track here.
Swing back to the right, down the street there.
Okay.
So what's that right there?
The white, that is the row on Bilbro that Mr.
Okay.
Burns built. Yeah.
Okay.
Just for the record too, while we're talking about that, I own probably 10 to 15 units within a stone's throw of the row on Bilbro. I don't want to disparage the deceased, but Mr. Fly did not care about his properties, did not invest money into them. They were absolute slums, and I was absolutely thrilled when I heard about Mr. Burns' project. It's way better now. The area looks nicer. It's absolutely perfect. It's wonderful.
So to your point, if you wanted to knock that down and build something like what Mr. Burns has got,
No, not quite that big, but just add maybe a third unit. It's currently a duplex. So one of the things I was going to touch on, if you see right here, this is a trailer. It's got electric run to it. How long has it been there?
Oh, well, there were actually 4 units, just like the one with the white. There were 4-unit complex.
Still there.
That was all 4 of those houses were facing Bilbro and 2 facing Monroe.
They're all still there. Somebody just snuck this trailer in at some point.
Yeah, well, up on Monroe, 304 next to that was a vacant lot on outside where we played it, and they put a trailer there.
Really?
Now, I think they've got a house there now.
There's 2 houses there that were built in the early 2000s. So
But
anyway.
this is back to the 60s, so it's a long time ago.
I think everybody could agree that 3 new units would be perfectly fitting for this lot. It wouldn't bring down the neighborhood. There's already a third unit on one of the lots immediately adjacent to it. Everything that this white parcel touches, or excuse me, the white duplex that parcel touches is already multifamily. So if I want to go in and build a third unit there, and that means getting rid of this old duplex that's way outlived its lifespan, why wouldn't that be an absolute sure? Go do it. That just seems such a no-brainer to me. So. Let's see. There are countless structures like this downtown. I'm using this one because it was just such an obvious example, but this is all over the place. This is a nice wide lot that's not very deep, and so to have three front entry, 3 driveways, 3 units right there, it just seems to make sense. There are far more dense areas in downtown, including many duplex, triplex, quadplex, and apartment buildings scattered throughout the downtown. We're not talking about Northwoods here. I don't think that there's a single home inside this downtown area where you could stand on the porch and throw a rock and not hit a duplex, a triplex, a quadplex, a house that was built as a single family that's been converted. So what's the pushback for this? I feel like, as somebody who cares about downtown, who wants it to be better and nicer, the city should be encouraging this. And let's look at all the positives. Number one, you remove blighted housing. Number two, you can insert new modern housing, which is safer. There's less risk of fire, tenant or owner potential. There's probably going to be less problems there. It's not going to put a burden on the city, on the police department, the fire department, or the city. Going to have higher property tax revenues, and growth is being accomplished in an area where there's currently no burden on the infrastructure. You go drive down Monroe Street, there's never a car on Monroe Street, right? Further, there needs to be a simpler set of regulations that oversee the infill redevelopment. Let's see. I've touched on so much of this stuff because I was jumping around. I apologize. I feel, so one thing that we talked about earlier was all the downtown and how Mr. McFarland, I believe you were saying that you kind of felt like they all ran together. I actually don't think that they do. I believe that there are kind of 2 different areas of downtown. There is the first area, which is Main Street, Lytle Street, College, Burton, the area close to the square, the roads that run east and west off the square that have the big historic homes. And in those areas, I don't think anybody is trying to get rid of the early 1900s craftsmen that are 3,000 square feet. I don't think anybody's trying to get rid of those. But then you go to these other areas, like the ones where Mr. Burns is doing most of his stuff, Spring Street, Vine Street, Leaf Avenue, Hancock, State Street. All these areas have so many houses that are substandard. It seems like a no-brainer to say, okay, there's one house here, it's a 75-foot wide lot, let's let them put 2 in. And, if the setback let's say the front back setback currently is 20 feet, well, I'd much rather have two nice houses with a front entry garage that have a 15-foot setback versus one old dumpy house. I think I got everything. I kind of jumped around. Something that we were talking about having a common area park. Has anybody ever explored the idea of the old hospital lot, opening that up? They spent a bunch of money to fence that. That could be a nice common downtown park. It's just sitting there. Is there anybody from MTSU here that can answer that?
We'll give you Dr. McPhee's number after this meeting.
Okay. I've got it. I'll text him. Yeah, I think I got everything. Any questions for me?
That's the same thought, but
Thank you, David.
he does want to do.
I'll take a pause.
That's good to be able to get feedback from people who are working, or who are working down there. So, and I hope that I say this with all of our planning team. It's easy. We're not trying to kill the messenger. So don't think that. This is good feedback to be able to for y'all to get back.
And we didn't want to get into, we have made changes, and we loved some of the suggestions. So as Ben mentioned, living, breathing document, we need your input.
That's right. And that's why we're here, is things have changed. Obviously, the market's changing, and we've got to be able to react or anticipate where it's going. And so this has been great for us. I think we've heard a lot. We kind of have direction to go with. And just, if there's any other opportunities that y'all want to talk about, let us know, because you can talk about that with staff. If you think about some of these things a little more or want to, bring that up to administration or other people at planning.
Just wanted to say something, Ben. I went through urban planning at the university, and there's a phrase that stuck in my head. What planning does is give people reasonable expectations. And whether you're a developer, or you're a planning department, or you're an existing property owner, helping people have reasonable expectations as to what they can do and what opportunities are there. This picture of our downtown is clarifying itself. Right now it's real fuzzy because there's a lot of changes, a lot of things like, David, you were talking about the transition. They're in transition. And hopefully I know they're going to be. The ones that you guys have done are amazingly positive transitions. I would encourage us to, again, have this dialogue on a regular basis as that picture gets a little clearer, as you guys define what opportunities are in our downtown, because the market's going to establish some of that. Available properties is going to establish some of those opportunities. As those things kind of come together, I think it would help us to have a regular dialogue as to what some of the opportunities are and what are some of the challenges. Something that you said, Brian, really it spoke to something. There's somebody that we need to be more intentional about getting their opinions too. It's those people that have bought at Roseanne or Billbrook. Okay, what did you see that we did right? What did you see that we did wrong? If there's some way when you do a development like that after a year, have some kind of feedback, I think that would be helpful for you, but it would be helpful for us to have that information going forward.
We send a survey out after everybody closes on something, so we get feedback. And one of the questions we ask is, what is something that can be improved? Please answer.
Perfect. That kind of information coming to planning and coming to us would help us make some decisions going forward. If there's something in code or if there's something in policy that could be changed, so that, again, reasonable expectations. That's all you guys are asking for, isn't it? You just want to know reasonable expectations for what you're doing. And I think that's probably more helpful to have that dialogue than it is to say, I know how much we'd like to get to a number, but I'm not sure that's, in something that's in transition like it is right now, I think that we may be cutting our nose off to spite our face to say, here's the number, and you don't meet the number. And there's some great opportunity that might come our way.
Well, Vice Mayor Shackle, I think you hit the nail on the head. Murfreesboro is in that transition. We've suburban, urban, and we're right in the middle of that, trying to figure that out. So, as Joel said, this gives us great direction. So,
Hey, Ben. Yes. I think Clyde had.
Can I say something real quick?
yeah.
Thank you, Ben. Clyde Roundtree, Helson Steel Engineering. Just real quick, because I think what Bill was saying is really on target. First off, I want to congratulate you because I think it's working. And this is a program that was established. If it was Joseph A. Lott said, let's do a CCO, this is going to work, catalyze downtown. And as a consultant, I worked on every one of those projects. Every one. I don't know if that's good or bad. I just worked on every one of them. And they're all planned developments, so the level of control we had on those projects was as high as we offer as a city. So I want to congratulate the planning staff, the council, on creating a program that is working. But as a consultant, this is how I feel. I feel like we regret it. That we kind of like the CCO, but now we're kind of going, is it really what we want? because every time I approach a project now, I just feel like it's creeping more and more towards subjectivity. So much so that our last planning commission meeting, we asked, what do you want? And the planning commissioner said, we don't know, but it's not that. So we walked away going, we have no direction. So I say that because if it's designed to catalyze development downtown and create density, it's working. If it's designed to bring quality homes downtown, it's working. All the developers, working with Brian's been an honor, but Brian wants to do good stuff. I mean, this is not infill, cheap stuff. Everyone wants to do great stuff. So I say that because what's happened, the reason we're in this room is because the developers are going to the consultants are going to the planning staff's going to the commission, and we're like, okay, planning's all for it. We're good. We worked our tail off. It's a PUD. We've had a lot of input. We get down to council, and it's like, no, it's too dense. It just becomes this real, so it creates conflict because planning staff doesn't know exactly, we think we're doing the right thing, and then we get to that point, and it gets down to council where I think it's become very subjective. It's just been like, we just don't like it. It feels too dense. There's a lot of feeling words versus stuff we can walk away with handles. And I think that's what really everyone's asking. We need handles so we really know how to move forward. And to Shane's point, if you look at Nashville, it is a hodgepodge. There's a little ranch house that's like probably worth $3 million, and there's a tall skinny, and it looks really odd. But it looks odd for a little while until the next person comes in. And to Jamie's point, they come in and they start, it starts making more sense as you go. We can't just scrape it all off and start from scratch. We just kind of have to work within the parameters we're given. So I just want to encourage you to realize, and I'm going to say this with the green space, the formal open space, what's happening on two of my projects right now, and one you referred to, when you have a double stack, a lot of our lots downtown are deep. So you're going to have a two-tiered situation. The last one I'm working on, the one we're trying to get through right now, has 2 in the front, 3 in the back. Well, we just want one more off the back. And what it does is exactly what we're concerned about. It creates this green space that no one's going to use. It's just going to become another something. We don't really know what it is, but it's just because it feels too dense. We met the parking requirements. Literally, most of the setback requirements have been met, but then we get down to going, well, we think it's a really good project. It's beautiful architecturally, lots of critique on that, and then we get right to that point where we're trying to cross the line. And it's like, all we got to do is tell the developer, we just got to pull off one unit. I mean, really, if you hadn't heard that 10 times, just pull off one more unit, and that unit's probably Brian's profit, or that's probably where their money spot is on that one unit. So it becomes one of those things where we can't give our developers direction either from the consulting community. And I think what was said today, I think is tremendous. If you ask Brian, if he get one more unit and he gives a bank for a green space bank, or Hamid, who we're working right now, we get one more unit, but you're going to add towards the green space bank. And then we look at downtown real strategically for pocket parks. So you're not trying to create the experience on the site, like the token gazebo or the fire pit that no one's going to use, but now you begin to go, we want to have pocket parks where the community, it's really, the green space and open space are designed for community. The thought is that if you have them, people are going to get together, and they're going to try to commune together. The fact is, if we dedicated every 16 lots, there's a linear park, that would probably be used a ton if we were strategic about it. But we're trying to make the developers create that experience on site. It's forcing our hand with parking. It's forcing our hand with the amount of units we can put on a lot, just because we're trying to find that way that token space that no one's going to use. So I think we're on the right track. I think it's a great idea. And I would say this, the last thing I'll say is that I think that you're going to get architectural diversity, because obviously Brian likes more contemporary, and now we're working under the Highland study, which is much more of a craftsman style. So how do you make a contemporary craftsman style work when our formal open space is on the roof? I mean, we have all these little conflicts between the architectural style, but the qualities of the buildings, I think, are just becoming better and better and better. So the fabric is starting to get into translation. So I say this because there are issues, and that's why we're here. We're not here because we're trying to refine it. We're here because we're running into lots of conflict, trying to get things moving forward. If we could just continue the dialogue, as Bill's mentioned, just continue the dialogue, figure out how to refine this. But I really, really want to keep it going. And I would love to keep it going at the same level we've got going, because there is momentum. And now our development community is kind of like going, they're just pulling back a little bit, because they're going, it used to be a one-for-one parking, and, parking was, the sewer allocation was waived, the parking requirements were waived, so we could really make things happen. Now they're going back, if it's just a single-family house that looked like that, we'd be happy. And that's where I think you guys have to really come to grips with the change, the transition that's going forward. We're just asking as a development community, as a consultant, to say, we need leadership from you all to make sure we know how to move forward. But I think you're doing a really good thing. I just think it has to be refined. I'd be real hesitant to kind of pull back too hard, because I think you're going to find the development community putting on the brakes going, it's just not, I'm hearing more, it's just not worth it for us. And I'm telling you, that one unit that we get rid of almost every time, that is there, that's the money they can use to do the next project. And I'm like, what is that one unit worth when we have to get rid of it just because it feels, you know what I'm saying, it just feels dense. I thank you all for the opportunity, but that's another perspective. I'm not a developer, but I'm working between the two and trying to bridge that gap. But I think it's fantastic, the direction we're heading in, and let's keep on moving forward. Thank you.
Jamie, do you have something?
Well, I think, for the record, to Mr. Roundtree and the developers, if I ever say something feels too tight, that's my way of saying I'm not going to vote for it, and it's definitely too tight. I think that it's reasonable to expect, it's reasonable to ask the Planning Commission and the council to be as objective as possible on each of these projects, but I think it's unreasonable to request that we can't say it just feels a type of way, because I think something can feel tighter laid out one way than it can feel tighter another way. And I think Kathy and I have talked about that. Maybe if you just turn the buildings the other way, and we always say, hey, we're not engineers, we can't tell you how to best lay out this property, but and to the mayor's point earlier, we're not supposed to look at economics, but we are, because it's the economics of our city. I don't think we're supposed to look at the developer's profit, but we're supposed to look at the economics of it. And so I'm sympathetic to the fact that developers need to put as many units as possible. But I am not sympathetic to the fact that they're going to build a concrete jungle in the middle of downtown Murfreesboro. So for the record, open space is not vague. We can make it more clear. Open space is not ridiculous. It is not unnecessary. It is not a waste. Open space is important. I understand a lot of people in this room may not grill in an open area. You have grills on your back porches. That's fantastic. But a lot of people in modern day America live in mixed use areas, and they do not have a grill on their back porch or a gazebo. And so I think just dismissing the idea of open space because it affects the profit of developers is doing a disservice to our community, because they need somewhere to let their dog go to the bathroom. They need somewhere to throw a ball with their kid. And because they can't afford a half-acre lot in Riverview and a house that costs $1.5 million, doesn't mean they shouldn't be able to throw the ball with their kid when they get home from work. So I think, though I'm someone who advocates that the free market will determine what a house should look like, to Brian's point, the free market determines whether it should have black shutters or brown. I don't care. But the free market doesn't determine whether or not a dog gets to go to the bathroom outside the house, because that's the house that person can afford. That person may have 4 kids, but that is the house they can afford. They cannot afford the half-acre lot on the north side of town or the west side of town. So, with all due respect to Brian and Mr. Roundtree and all the consultants that we hear from on a regular basis, it is our job to make sure that all of these things are considered, even if sometimes that means our feelings are a little vague. That's all I have to say to staff.
Thank you. So I think we've heard a lot. Obviously, we've gone around and back, and that's exactly what we wanted. So I think we can move on to kind of what next steps look like. Unless somebody has some other opportunities they want to talk about. You know, one of the things we looked at in doing this is if there's some low-hanging fruit out there that we can change and change something quickly, you know, we can try to bring something back to council. Otherwise, what we'll do is, you know, we may look at this as a multi-layer approach. Maybe, you know, we heard a lot of, you know, if it's a little closer to the downtown, the main downtown area, maybe we look at height there. Maybe we look at different things as we get a little bit further away with some minimum standards. So what we'll do is we'll take your feedback and we're going to try to layer this into our zoning code and start having some workshops with developers, consultants, people like that, so that we can get some feedback on what we're hearing from you as we try to layer that into the code. Next steps after that are, you know, identifying those areas of intensity, further workshops where we'll come back after we do, just like we've done in the past, where we reach out to our stakeholders, come back with another workshop that's maybe a little bit more intense, digging into what some of these changes are, what they mean, how they affect the other areas that we've talked about. And so that's, you know, that's where we see it. And if there is low-hanging fruit that we can identify specifically from this discussion, you know, we can try to bring those to you a little bit more quickly, but otherwise it's going to be a more broad change.
We have everybody here at the table, and Ken is not here, but I'd like to get everyone's opinion, and Kathy can appreciate this, because this really goes back to when Bob Lamb was chairman, and we got on this kick about gas station awnings. Because Bob didn't like the way the gas station awnings were designed. And so now when you drive through Murfreesboro, you'll see hip gas station awnings because that's what Bob liked. Well, then you fast forward, and I'm calling names out because a lot of y'all don't remember some of these. So Shannon Logan came in, and our planning department transitioned into much more architectural. I remember having the conversation with Shannon. This was not on a planned development, and Shannon said, "Hey, I don't like your window panes that you're using on this commercial building." And I'm like, "Well, okay, but is that something that you get to look at?" And she said, "Well, no, but I'm just giving you my opinion. I don't like the window pane patterns." So, you know, and as a builder and a developer, you hate to tell, just like all due respect to Clyde, I would say, and take it up for our planning commission, you know, everyone, you don't want to say something negative to an applicant when they're coming through. Like Brian's sitting out there, and I'll tell y'all in my years of being here, the proposal that and I'm telling Brian something I've already told him before, so it's not going to embarrass him, but the project that he proposed on Haynes Drive was by far the worst project I have ever seen come through planning commission and city council. So, you know, you're taking a downtown project that would be okay downtown and putting it in a residential area. That makes no sense. But, sorry, Brian. What is our opinion on our planning team's leeway in talking about architecture, colors, you know? So at the same time, Ben, like, so if a planner says, "Hey, what color is your building going to be?" You know, part of me wants to go, "Well, it's none of your business what color my building is going to be. That's my decision." But we try to be nice, because as you come through with any planning team, you don't want to say, "Well, it's none of your business," because you want your project to go through the process. So, like,
Brian tells me it's none of my business all the time when I ask.
So my opinion, and I'm passionate about this, the government should not have a role unless it is a planned development on what a project looks like.
I agree.
And if I've said this before, years ago when a person said, "Hey, we think you should have handrails on the front of this project doesn't look good without handrails," and you're like, "Well, okay, thank you, but I'm building the project and I don't want to put handrails on my project." So my thing is, I think that we walk a fine line between what is a good project in what is subjective on what a team member likes and what they don't like. Like Brian's project that you did across from Evergreen Cemetery, front entry car there in a modern style house, it's probably not the project what I would want to buy, but they all sold. So that means that that's a good project. I just think we have crossed over into an area where we have really gotten the reputation in Murfreesboro that we're really hard to deal with on subjective standards. And so I would just like to hear everyone's opinion on that.
Yeah, I agree with that, and I think it's difficult sometimes because I get poked at by some of the consultants and the engineers and the other council members about how I'm very serious about things like parking. But I think that's when I'm frustrated about parking requirements, I think that's frustrating for the developer because that means they may have to change their density. I mean, they'll sit there all day and listen to us complain about the color of the shutters or the hardy board and go back and forth on that, but whether they paint the hardy board brown or yellow, they're still making the same revenue. But when we need things like more parking or less density, that affects their revenue. And so I know that that's a more difficult topic to debate on with the developers than architecture. But I think it's the more important one, quite frankly, because as we went to those downtown projects with the field trip we did around town, I understand that they all met the parking requirement, and that is something I have preached since I got on planning commission and since I've been on council. I understand that something meets the parking requirement, but our parking requirement may just need to be relooked at, because I think in a perfect world, we think each house only has 2 cars. But that's just not the case.
Not the case.
It's not the case at all. And we have to stop expecting people to park their car in their garage, because it does not happen. I live in Puckett Station, and there are 3-car garages, and every car is still in the driveway. And there are 3-car garages. So it's just something I'm really passionate about, and I know it's more difficult to talk about those things to the developer, and it's not as sexy as the color of the windows, but it is just as important, because at the end of the day, in 5-10 years, we're not going to care what the color of the windows are, but we're going to care when emergency services vehicles can't get up and down these streets downtown because cars are lined up on both sides of the road. And it's going to be unsafe for our people living there. And if we want to attract people downtown, that is going to be the key. It's something downtown Franklin has done very well. You know, the street parking it makes perfect sense. There's good parking on their mixed-use developments, and you don't see cars parked up on the curb and blocking driveways and blocking mailboxes. And so I would love to see us focus more on things like that, because sometimes it's frustrating to think that sometimes I'm the only one that's that passionate about parking, and maybe I'm a little too serious about parking, but it's also because it needs to be talked about just as much as the color does. But
I don't even think we should be dealing with architectural review stuff at all, because it becomes very subjective. You talk to 4 different people, you get 4 different responses, and I hear from all these builders and developers, well, if I talk to this person, it's okay. If I talk to this person, it's not okay. If I talk to this person, I get a third opinion.
yeah.
Subjective stuff shouldn't even be dealt with at all. If that builder or developer wants to take a risk and build something with their money that they're putting into it, and it doesn't sell, they're the ones losing out, not us. When we were on the field trip, a house I actually sold a client is now purple. And Jamie goes, I really love the color of that house. We would have never let a builder build a house that was that color, ever. But it had added character to that house, and it added character to the neighborhood. Mm-hmm. If a builder wants to make it and he thinks it's going to sell, let him take the shot. It gives everything doesn't need to look the same. Things that look different give character to an area. We actually made a joke at Planning Commission a while back about the gas station canopies. We went from everything being flat box canopies, and now they're all hip roofs, so they all look exactly the same. They just look exactly the same, different than the ones that used to look exactly the same. So we've created the same problem we had before, it's just they look different now. So, yeah, I don't think we should be dealing with this architectural review stuff at all. That's not any of the Planning Commission's business.
And I think it's hard too when at Planning Commission we can get so caught up, and Sean and I will do it too. We'll get so caught up on things like design standards that then it gets to council, and council asks the hard questions, and the developers kind of blindsided. Like an engineer told me probably last year, well, nobody asked about this at Planning Commission. I'm like, oh, well, you got a different, but and then maybe Sean and I can do a better job when we're on Planning Commission of saying, hey, this is something that I bet you the council is going to bring up. I don't like speaking for the rest of council, but I think that's what the mayor alluded to is we've run into lately is things have gotten to council and what we're worried about is totally different than what the Planning Commission is worried about. And neither's right nor wrong. We just all maybe need to see if we can get on the same page and be preemptive about some of those thoughts.
Well, and
right?
what you're seeing too, like Kathy, it's a great example. You know, Kathy's company bought Ichiban, or the old Moose Lodge, which was in serious disrepair, and now they're taking something that was in serious disrepair and improving all of Broad Street. But I don't think it's our responsibility to tell, their team, hey, we don't like your window placement, or we don't like the color of your building that you're painting the brick. And so that's what I keep hearing from the development community, that we're getting a little more too involved in architecture. Maybe that's something we can, Greg knows from preaching the choir, I told him all this. Kathy, I'm sorry.
I didn't realize that we had any, back in the day when all we had was RS10, RS12, RS15, we didn't deal with architecture. But it has evolved to where the majority of projects we look at are planned developments. Mm-hmm. And in planned developments, we do look at, and I don't know how far you go in the word architecture, but we do look at colors. We do look at the overall look and feel of the project. So we do have a say-so on that. And if that's not what we're supposed to do as a planning commission or as a city council, then we need to understand better how we're supposed to look at planned developments, because that's the majority of what we look at. And when we go to just a straight-out zoning, we're not dealing with the colors, the windows, what color they paint the building, any of that stuff, to my knowledge. A planned development and a straight zoning.
In straight zoning, I believe it's just bright colors. That's the only direction we have, is just no bright colors.
Well, we wrote the design guidelines because we wanted to make sure we at least had control, that we don't have the orange building being painted, or the gorilla on the rooftop on Broad Street, that we dealt with. Remember that. But planned developments were, it was architecture. Mm-hmm. That started back in the early 2000s that we started doing. Actually, I think Three Rivers was the first planned development that ever came through the city of Murfreesboro. But we did focus more on variations in roof pitch, and you don't want just a blank slate. But this is just my opinion, Kathy. I think the planned development process has evolved to where it's become less planning and more architecture.
I agree.
And so I think that's the part where that was not what the planned development process was initially designed for. It was designed for amenities. We allowed density to be able to have those amenities, open space, in a defined process. But you'll also notice on planned developments now, we're not even requiring full architectural plans it used to be we required full plans on every single project that came through. You had to say, here's the 6 plans I'm going to build. And now we don't do that anymore. So the reason I say that, we have left that up to really the planning staff looks now at the plans that are being turned in to determine if they are within the intent of the planned development. So maybe it's something that we go back to say, if you're going to build 6 or 8 plans, you give us those fully developed plans. It costs you more money on the front end, but then they're approved as you go. So I don't know. It just seems like that's where we've transitioned into.
I just wonder then, when we look at what we're asking them to turn in to look at, would it be the project that we could expect to see when we go out? If we're not going to say that what we're looking at is, so they could turn in a project that has, say, all gray or taupe-colored buildings, but then when we actually go see the project where we ride around and do a bus tour and look at what we approved, here's what we approved, here's the project we got, it could be orange and blue instead of tan and gray, and that would be fine, right? That's what we're saying.
No.
If we're not looking at, I don't know, I just want to understand what we're supposed to be able to say anything about and what we're not. That's all I want to do is do the
What
right
I'm
thing.
saying, and this is my opinion, I'm not on planning commission, but I don't even think we should be, clearly we don't want to be painting houses purple, and, we had the house on First Avenue that the guy got mad and said, I'm painting the house purple, and painted the house purple. But my opinion, our plan development, we never put plan developments in place to talk about colors and window colors, and someone to say, you've got too many white windows in your development. They need to have taupe windows. You need to have some black windows. That was not the intent. It was to make sure that you're getting a good quality product. But like, in my opinion, we should never go in saying, we want all these houses taupe. Because you know what happens? 5 years from now, we're like, hey, taupe's out. We got to now start painting these houses different colors. I don't think we should, my opinion, I don't think we should be involved in any of that process. So I think we just, this project looks good. The architecture looks good from a variation standpoint.
The structural and the...
Right now, I don't think we would approve Wayne Belt, the Decker and Belt product right now, because we would say that there's too much brick on those projects. They're not varying. The roof lines aren't varying. And I would argue that most of the Decker Belt projects that you go into, Black Fox Crossing, those things are 35 and 40 years old and still look great. And they're front entry garages, by the way.
They do. I'll just add, before I got on council, I went to Ireland and Scotland, and there's a builder developer on the trip with me, out of town, not a local one. And I told him I'd just gotten elected to the council. And he said, "You won't see me anytime soon in your city." I said, "Why do you say that?" And he says, "I've done projects in your city. The planning and the planning commission is the hardest one I've ever had to deal with in the Southeast." He says they get into architecture, they get into stuff that they don't need to be getting into. It costs me time, it costs me money. I will take my business to Smyrna, I will take it to Mount Juliet, I will take it elsewhere. And that was his feedback to me. And that's what I worry about from an efficiency standpoint. If this is the reputation, then that cost us as a city projects and time and money for people that are trying to invest in our city.
I would just say, I've heard that many times, too. I think, for me at least, and I would think for most of our planning commission, we want to know what those changes are that need to be made. If whatever we've been doing all this time hasn't been what the city is, wants to see, make sure we understand exactly what those, and not exactly, I just want to get in the right direction. So architecture, just direction's what we're looking for. Because I need to understand, if we're looking at a plan development, what is it we're commenting on? What is it we're looking at? Is it, if the developer is asking for concessions in exchange for density, what is it we're going to allow, That was the whole idea behind plan developments way back when, the very first one we ever looked at, so. Or we could go back to all straight zoning, that'd be great.
That happened. We went from early 2012 to 2013, all we were doing is changing plan developments that got approved in the mid-2000s. And so then we all said, okay, no more plan developments, we're going to straight zoning. But like right now, Three Rivers probably wouldn't be approved as it was in 2008 because we've had just such a nightmare with rear-loaded alleys.
Yeah.
But you drive through.
Until you.
Yeah. You just don't know. My thing, I think we should, as a council, give as much guidance to take out subjectivity in the process. That would be my, you give me a checklist, you tell me what I have to go through, and I'm going to hit every one of those checklists. When there's gray area in there that you're trying to understand where that's coming from, I think that's where the confusion gets into play. So, and if we can somehow, I wish that downtown that there was a one-page sheet of paper that had, hey, do this, 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 and this.
Yeah.
But that's going to be really tough to be able
It's
to.
like the open space thing, you're
Yeah.
checking that box.
To do that.
You wanted that box to check, but then that's just what we want, so.
I'd really like to see us trust the planning process a little bit. I think the idea is refine what we're doing, because there are lots of good things happening in our downtown. This regular communication between the planning commission and the council, having that on a regular basis where we can hear each other and express what are the frustrations that the planning department tell us, where's the boundary that you need a little bit more definition or something like that. I think if we'll commit ourselves to refining the process, but I'm a little concerned. I think throwing the baby out with the bathwater and saying, guys, we want you all in here doing this, then I'm thinking there's going to be some yin to the yang and some things that we've given. They want I think developers and planners and consultants want some direction. So, because that's what the community is going to be. I think the public's going to demand us have some kind of direction. And the process is, it goes through a refining process, and maybe there's some things we can do better, but I'm not willing to give up on the planning process and say, guys, do what you want to and let the market decide. I think we have some responsibility, and we all want it. I think the Planning Commission wants, that's why you signed up to do it, is because you wanted to contribute to what is going to be our community in the future. And we just need to communicate a little bit better between all the parties that are at the table. We need to learn how to dialogue and learn the language that communicates a little bit better. It's not a matter of just saying, I don't really care about your opinion about stuff. I'd like to hear people's opinions, because quite honestly, I think that makes it a better project to some degree. That it's not to constrain developers in their investment, it's to try to help them understand what the community desires, and then we become what we want to be, as opposed to just let the market drive everything. I'm not quite willing to give up the reins in that. I think commit ourselves to the planning process, and that should help us. We can do it better where it needs to be better. Let's work at making it better.
I can see how you all want guidelines. You all work so hard. I have looked at the planning commission before, and I would fall asleep after an hour, and then I wake up and y'all still on it. So you all definitely have some marathons. And I know we need to give better guidelines. I would like to see when something is turned down or you don't think it's going to work, I would like to see you all just nip it in the bud and planning commission and not even bring it to the council.
That's the Haynes Drive property that Brian's still here. Yeah, Brian's still here. I vocalized that at the planning commission. I said the council's already looked at this at a workshop. They are not going to approve this when it gets to council. I made it very vocally clear at the planning commission. It still passed.
Well, that's what I'm saying. If you all are against it, I personally, as a council member, I don't want to see it. I don't even want to see it come to us. Just nip it in the bud on your end and let it be. That's just my personal opinion.
So clearly, there's a lot of differing views, and we're all people, and we anticipate that that's going to be the case here. So if I can get it back into the next steps, unless you have more comments or other opportunities you want to talk about, we want to try to take the vision as we can understand it from today, start trying to put that in, and we want to have these workshops. This isn't obviously the last opportunity. We'll come back. You may change your mind on some things. You may have different ideas of of what was brought up today, think on it a little bit more, and then we'll have that opportunity to come back in front of you with something that we can start looking at. Maybe not a fully refined, but something that we can start looking at. We want to make sure that we're going in that right direction. It's going to take us some time, but we'll start bringing that back to you and doing some workshops with community, bringing it back. So thank you, so much. We didn't really know what to expect. We had a hot bench today, so that was really good. So that's all we have for you, and we just really appreciate it. Appreciate everybody.
And I know that then we will, there's no further business from the planning commission, we'll adjourn our planning commission, and I know.
I have something I just want to bring up. Today, we were talking a lot about houses that are not worth staying up, they need to be demolished. I have a concern, and I guess this can be for the building and code. The house that is located on Academy and State, I've talked to building and codes about it several times in the last couple of years, but now I see rodents come out of there. It looks like gophers. It looks like cats. And they're coming out from that house, from that area. And our funeral home backs up to this, and our fence is just completely almost torn down. And when people come to the funeral home to park, these limbs and everything are leaning over on their cars. So something needs to be done. More than anything are those rats or whatever that is coming. They may be cats, but they are huge. That house going toward Greenhouse Ministry.
Take a look at it.
Academy and State.
It's right next to Bradley Museum, Bradley Academy Museum on Academy. But this house is on the corner of Academy and State.
You brought it up before, haven't you? You brought that house
Oh, I brought it up, yes, several times. But something has to be done now. I'm afraid a kid, people walk with their families and I'm just afraid maybe they might get bitten or something. I don't know.
Kathy, you've adjourned the planning commission meeting. Is there any other comments? Well, Mayor, you're back, so that's okay.
Mayor, Chair Jones has adjourned the planning commission, so we're.
Hey, thank y'all for everything. I know we don't ever get together to do this, so it's good to at least get some good feedback. So thank y'all for serving. Hey, I want to see council for about 5 minutes. Kelly, if you could be there for that. All right, we'll stand adjourned.